So as Kai said, I'm engaged in theater studies in the first place. So I brought you here a playwright, a French playwright, Bernard-Marie Koltes, and of course Bruce Lee, Lee's influence on Koltes. So the idea of comparing the postmodern dramas of Bernard-Marie Koltes with Bruce Lee's films came up when I read about the French writer's fascination with martial arts movies, especially Bruce Lee. Koltes was already working on his plays in his 20s when he worked as a ticket collector in the cinema so that he could watch a lot of movies. There are also similarities in the way how they both reached a sudden and loud success, complicated by drug issues, and sadly died at a young age. But there are not only biographical data about this interest. Koltes also published short papers on martial arts, which attest the importance of this influence. For example, here's this quote on the slide from one of these essays. Good kung fu movies speak about love the most profoundly. Romantic movies not only represent love in a stupid way, but they aren't engaged in kung fu at all. These are my translations so far, if not so perfect. Okay, next slide. But I will come back to these lines later. The main reason to investigate this influence is the recurring situation in the Koltes plays of two strangers standing in front of each other, mostly in dark alleys, in a threatening situation where the fight can happen any time. This resembles the fighting scenes of the martial arts movies, especially the minutes before the fight, on the top of the suspense. These lines on this slide from the night just before the forest describes this state. I've had it up to here. This time, that's it. I can't hold it any longer. I want to throw punches. So I would like to sketch some ideas about the potential convergences in the following. So in the center, we have this kick, punch, thrust, or shot waiting to be executed. The characters of Koltes' plays always come from the margin: prostitutes, dealers, and murderers, mostly migrants, strangers alone in a hustle collective. They are looking for someone late at night in the dark streets to make some dubious deal. Someone is trying to sell some suspicious stuff to the other, a bargain begins, and when it becomes more and more clear that the deal would fail, the text switches to the rhetoric of violence. We can find the topic of the deal in Bruce Lee's films too. For example, in The Way of the Dragon, the bad guys want to buy the good guys' restaurant. There are drug dealing businesses in Enter the Dragon and in The Big Boss. Okay. 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 It's maybe not close enough. But the eye for an eye logic of revenge, for example, in Fist of Fury, also repeats the structure of economic exchange. The direct heading to the fight in the Koltes dramas can be read as the pure essence of dramatic conflict in the classical terms. But as a pure physical action, the fight also challenges theatrical representation, overemphasizing the performative dimension, the actors here and now at the expense of the signified message. The knockout of the actor is equal to the knockout of the representation. In the case of the Kung Fu movies, we also have to speak about the intensification of the presence, the event, the attraction, which is guaranteed by the actor's physical movements, the spectacular martial arts techniques. Just like in early cinema, experimental or exploitation movies, the emphasized shooting presence risk the realistic coherence of the film. In this aesthetics of ambivalence, as Leon Hunt calls it, narrative has to do the balancing so as the attraction could reach its effect, but the fiction could also remain coherent. If we follow Derrida's idea about there's nothing outside language and we treat the bodily movements as text, we have to regard this kick, punch, thrust as a corporeal metaphor of speech act, presence here and now. And then the question is, do the Bruce Lee films function with the same realistic coding as, for example, porn movies, as Linda Williams explains them, suggesting the ultimate obscenity of the medium, where simulation denies signification, replacing it with naive referentiality? In this case, we had to treat the kick toward the camera as the violent version of looking at the camera, as the auratic actor destroys the apparatus of mechanical reproduction. The question is the same in Koltes' case. Does the knife fight demonstrate the victory of theater's here and now, its liberation from literature's reign, in the manner of the avant-garde performances of the 60s? In this case, they both would stand for the metaphysical ideas of presence, authenticity, reality, meaning, self, and so on. I don't think this is the case, or at least not the only reading of their artwork. In the following, I would like to demonstrate how the delay, the divert of these violent encounters, stands for, allegorizes precisely a deconstructive concept of representation in both cases. Interpreters of Koltes say that the wish to make a dia represents the desire to make a connection with someone so as to create identity in the mirror of the other. The theme of the dia as a speech act is also the scene of creating performative identity. The claim of the dubious stuff is also the claim of the self. This is how the image of economic exchange, fight for power, and love, relying on emotional depth, overlap with each other. Now I go back to the first slide's quote. This is why it's so meaningful if the dia fails, and it always fails in Koltes' plays. If you don't take part, this is the fourth. Okay. If you don't take part of this dialectic game between the seller and the buyer, the self and the other, the identity, the signified, the center of a meaningful word cannot emerge. When there's no response to the soliloquies, or when the dialogue becomes extremely intricate, highly poetic, the failure of communication suggests the impossibility of an authentic, coherent self. This is what presumably happens in the end of the night just before the forest, Koltes' one-character drama. These are the ending lines of the play's long soliloquy. I found you, and I grab you by the arm. Mama, 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 say nothing, do not move. I look at you, I love you, brother, brother, me. I've looked for someone who would be like an angel in the middle of this mess, and here you are, I love you, and the rest, some beer, and I still don't know how I could say it. What a wreck, what a mess, brother, and still the rain, the rain, the rain, the rain. Since there's no response to this interpellation, no other character enters the play, we have to think that the encounter remains a desire. That's what also happens in the level of the language. The character cannot name his thoughts precisely, cannot grab the meaning. In the case of martial arts movies, here we have to turn to the compulsory element of suspense. Balancing between attraction and narration, action and fiction, attraction cinema has to build up the realistic shell around the attraction scenes so as to suture the visceral impact into the realistic reception. But there are some cases when the narrative's works of holding back the action seems causeless, we could say arbitrary. First, there is the theme of education, as Paul Bowman puts it, Lee's performative lessons about martial arts. In The Way of the Dragon, when we first see Tang Lung fighting, he is commenting his own movements to his ad hoc audience by naming the techniques just as if we were in the gym. We've seen this scene in the morning. There is also a certain training atmosphere around the Coliseum scene when Tang Lung and his opponent are making warm-ups before the final life and death struggle. Why is this preparation shown to us on the top of the dramaturgy? Isn't the main point of cinematic realism that it can make us believe that all those fighting situations we exercise in endless simulations are really happening in a real, spontaneous situation? Another theme which provides suspense is the ethical codex about avoiding fight. Probably the most famous example is in The Big Boss, when Chang refuses to become involved in the first part of the film. Let me cite Koltes here from Essay Out. One of the most intensive pains I have ever felt was when I first saw Bruce Lee refusing to fight with the villains who attacked him. Because of a stupid pendant, he refuses to defend himself during the third part of the movie. He lets them humiliate him without doing anything, though he was the best. Of course, we have revenge at the end of the movie. He beats everyone to pulp, but the joy we feel in the end doesn't help us forget the former pain. Every time I watch The Big Boss, I leave the cinema exhausted from anger and shock because of that stupid pendant and dumb woe. In an allegorical reading, this anger, this shock, this frustration can be regarded as the effect of the tension inside rhetorics, the tension between performativity and referentiality rendered by the film as the fight and its obstruction. Representation has always already begun, says Derrida. The presence is penetrated, it cannot emerge clearly, just as a shadow, as a trace, as a staggering of the homogeneous fiction. This is why Bruce Lee doesn't break the camera eventually. He doesn't do that because the filmic figure of imaginary signifier cannot become totally present. The apparatus can never be fully uncovered. Performativity cannot drop off representation. This is the same reason why the fight stays frozen in the words in Koltes' plays. Speech act doesn't turn into physical action, but as a positive possibility, as Derrida said. It disrupts theatrical representation, making it permanently unsteady. This failure of making performativity fully present doesn't necessarily lead us to the sad announcement of the closure of representation, of the absolute impossibility of direct experience. Theoreticians like Judith Butler or Gilles Deleuze treat this repression of performativity exactly as disruptive forces against hierarchical, coherent, oppressive ideology. Butler describes the strategy of subversion as mobilizing the inevitable failure of identity. Deleuze finds a potential disrupting power in minority. He says to speak in a minor way instead of being major means to subtract the power of language. I cite Deleuze, subtract, amputate, neutralize the elements of power, the elements that make up or represent a system of power. The subterranean work of variation gives birth to and multiplies the unexpected. Everything remains but under a new light, with new sounds, new gestures. In connection with the minor adaptations of Shakespeare's dramas, he says, in operating the subtraction of the characters of state power, director Carmelo Bene will give free rein to the constitution of the man of war on the state, with his prostheses, his deformities, his outgrowths, his defects, his variations. The man of war has always been considered in mythology as of another origin from that of the statesman or the king, deformed and twisted. He always comes from somewhere else. The foreign warrior, man of war, of Bruce Lee's character also arrives from an outer place. Before beating everyone to pulp, we get to know him as lacking the qualities of fitting in. He cannot speak the community's language on several cultural levels. He doesn't know what to and how to order in a restaurant, how to behave with a prostitute, or use the toilet. This handicap, because of cultural differences, is exactly the main topic of Koltes too. Let me cite from the soliloquy of the night just before the forest, and here there's a certain thematical element which connects the film and the text, and here I would like to remind you to Slavoj Žižek's explanation about the different usage of toilets, how they show the differences of the cultures. You may know this from YouTube. There's a short video about this. Okay, so how the Koltes lines sound. I'm not really from here. They did notice. These are the last. Sorry, not the last line, just lines from this drama. I'm not really from here. They did notice. For sure, those pricks packed behind my back after I took a piss when I was washing my dingaling. Makes you think they are all pricks, those French. Can't even imagine because they've never seen anybody wash his dingaling. Except for us, it's old habit. My father taught me that. And when I was washing it a minute ago, like I always do, by the sink downstairs, feeling all those pricks behind my back, I acted like I didn't understand, like a complete foreigner who could understand nothing those pricks said in French, and I could hear them while I washed myself. What's he doing, that weird foreigner? He's making his dingaling have a drink. How do you do that, make your dingaling drink? Though this solitude and alienation is uncomfortable, the hero, neither in Lee's films nor in Koltes dramas, doesn't want to be part of this hustle community. Tanglung criticizes the Roman luxury of the fountains. Koltes speaker, probably an Arab migrant, calls the people around him French pricks. Their separation never dissolves. The foreigner remains as a thorn in community's body, in the manner of performativity, subverting the system from the inside. To summarize our notions of comparison, I have to say that the pain, the anger, the shock we feel because Bruce Lee refuses to fight back, even after he does so, is exactly the evidence that the film doesn't treat attraction cinema here and now in a naive metaphysical way, but it rather implies the deconstructive concept of performativity. Just like Koltes, who by holding the action back, pushing the tension to its limits, doesn't follow avant-garde performance's idea of pure presence. This makes Bruce Lee and Koltes rebels in the Deleuzian meaning. They are fighters speaking minor languages in order to subvert the ideologic system from the inside, accepting that there's no other way of eliminating the enemy of representation. Thank you.